But when Cephas came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face because he stood condemned. These are the words of the Apostle Paul himself, recorded in his letter to the Galatians. Imagine one of early Christianity's most foundational figures, Peter, the very rock of the church, publicly denounced by another apostle. This wasn't a quiet theological disagreement. It was a brutal face-to-face confrontation. What profound ideological rift, what bitter power struggle could have driven such an open contradiction between the nascent faith's supposed leaders? This clash, however, is merely a surface ripple. It begs the deeper, more unsettling question. Was the Apostle Paul, often celebrated as Christianity's greatest missionary, actually a radical reinterpreter whose vision fundamentally reshaped the emerging faith? Or did he simply expand upon a unified message, working in harmony with Jesus' original apostles? This video embarks on a meticulous investigation, sifting through the earliest textual evidence to uncover the true nature of these foundational relationships and the fierce ideological battles that defined early Christianity. To truly grasp the gravity of this investigation, we must first understand the narrative that has largely prevailed for centuries. The prevailing narrative has presented Paul as Christianity's most indefatigable missionary, tirelessly spreading a singular, unified gospel across the Roman world. He is often seen working in harmonious concert with the original apostles, Peter and James, their efforts converging to establish the burgeoning faith. The book of Acts, in particular, frequently portrays Paul as a pivotal figure whose mission to the Gentiles was largely sanctioned and supported by the Jerusalem church. This traditional view paints a picture of a largely cohesive early Christian movement, united in purpose and doctrine from its very inception. This common understanding serves as our baseline. However, to fully appreciate the complexities we are about to uncover, the turbulent historical landscape of the first century demands our attention. To truly grasp the complexities, we must transport ourselves back to the volatile crucible of the first century CE. Imagine Judea, a small Roman province, a crossroads of empires and ideas, where dozens of Jewish sects, from the rigid Pharisees to the ascetic Essenes, each interpreted the sacred law differently. Beyond its borders, the vast Roman Empire was a mosaic of pagan cults and Hellenistic philosophies, all coexisting. Within this vibrant, often fractious environment, the nascent movement following Jesus was far from unified. The critical question wasn't just who Jesus was, but what it meant to follow him, especially for non-Jews. Was adherence to the Mosaic law, circumcision, dietary restrictions, still necessary? This wasn't a minor debate. It was a foundational schism threatening to splinter the entire movement. It was into this charged atmosphere that a singular, powerful voice would emerge, one whose own words would provide the most direct and often unsettling account of these burgeoning conflicts. Having contextualized the tumultuous first century, our investigation now pivots to a crucial discovery: the Apostle Paul's own letters. Unlike the harmonized narratives that came later, such as the book of Acts, these epistles offer an unfiltered first-person perspective, penned by Paul himself in the very crucible of early Christianity. They are not merely theological treatises, they are personal defenses, passionate arguments, and raw confessions. When we engage with these authentic texts, a starkly different Paul begins to emerge, one whose account often diverges from the polished story. What profound assertions of independence, what hidden conflicts do Paul's own words reveal about his mission and his relationships with the Jerusalem apostles? In Galatians, Paul immediately launches into a fervent defense of his apostolic authority. Our first piece of textual evidence comes directly from Galatians chapter 1, verses 11 and 12, where Paul makes a startling declaration. He writes, "For I would have you know, brothers, that the gospel that was preached by me is not man's gospel. For I did not receive it from any man, nor was I taught it, but I received it through a revelation of Jesus Christ." This is a bold claim of direct divine commissioning, bypassing any human intermediaries or the authority of the Jerusalem apostles. It stands in stark contrast to the book of Acts, which portrays Paul being guided by Ananias after his conversion and later discipled by Barnabas, suggesting a more traditional human transmission of the gospel. Paul further emphasizes this independence in Galatians 1:18-19, stating he visited Jerusalem only 3 years later, and then specifically to meet Cephas, or Peter, and James the Lord's brother, explicitly not all the apostles. This isn't just a detail, it's a deliberate assertion of his unique, non-delegated authority. But what exactly does this self-proclaimed independence signify for the nascent Christian movement, according to academic analysis? For many leading New Testament scholars, Paul's forceful declaration in Galatians is far more than a personal anecdote. It's a strategic assertion of independent apostolic authority, crucial for legitimizing his controversial mission to the Gentiles. They interpret Galatians as Paul's passionate self-defense, arguing that his gospel and his apostleship derive directly from a divine revelation, not from human instruction or the approval of the Jerusalem pillars. This textual evidence, therefore, doesn't merely highlight Paul's unwavering conviction. It implies a profound, pre-existing tension within the nascent Christian movement itself. It suggests a fundamental struggle over who held the legitimate authority to define this new faith and what its core tenets should be, long before any formal councils. This isn't just a theological nuance, it's a foundational crack in this narrative. But if Paul was so intent on establishing his own direct commission, what deeper implications does this have for the very foundation of Christianity and the supposed harmony of its earliest leaders? This evidence from Galatians, then, profoundly challenges the narrative of a unified early church. If Paul's apostleship was truly a direct divine commission bypassing human authority, it fundamentally undermines the idea of a cohesive, top-down structure. It suggests not merely a disagreement, but a profound struggle for theological supremacy, Paul's radical gospel of grace for Gentiles versus the Jerusalem apostles' continued emphasis on adherence to Jewish law. This isn't a minor doctrinal squabble, it's a foundational divergence on the very nature of salvation and the path to the new covenant. But if Paul was so independent, so divinely commissioned, why did he still feel compelled to visit Jerusalem's pillars at all? The plot, however, thickens when we examine the most crucial meeting meant to resolve these very tensions. This pivotal assembly, often called the Jerusalem Council, was ostensibly held to unite these fractured factions. Yet, even here, Paul's own account dramatically diverges from the harmonious narrative presented in the book of Acts, revealing not resolution, but deeper layers of contention. Consider Paul's account of this pivotal Jerusalem meeting in Galatians 2:1-10. He states he privately laid before those of repute the gospel that I proclaim among the Gentiles, adding emphatically that they added nothing to me. This portrays a validation, a negotiation of equals, not a submission to authority. Crucially, Paul makes no mention of any formal decree or a grand public council. Now, juxtapose this with Acts chapter 15. Here, we encounter a dramatic public assembly, a formal debate involving apostles and elders, culminating in a definitive decree issued to Gentile churches. This decree outlines specific prohibitions, avoiding food offered to idols, blood, strangled animals, and sexual immorality. The absence of any such comprehensive decree in Paul's own letters, especially when addressing churches where these very issues were rampant, is a profound silence. This isn't merely a difference in emphasis, it's a stark textual divergence pointing to a deliberate shaping of narratives. But what could be the motive behind such disparate portrayals of the same pivotal event? Scholarship, however, offers a compelling explanation for this textual divergence. Leading New Testament scholars such as James D.G. Dunn proposed that the author of Acts, traditionally attributed to Luke, had a distinct theological and historical agenda. Their aim was to present a more unified, less contentious picture of early Christianity for its audience, possibly to demonstrate its internal cohesion and legitimacy within the Roman Empire. This wasn't necessarily deliberate fabrication, but rather a careful redaction, a reshaping of events to integrate Paul more smoothly into the apostolic succession and minimize the appearance of deep schisms. Acts portrays Paul as working in concert with Jerusalem, solidifying his authority retrospectively. This phenomenon, where two foundational texts offer such distinct accounts of a critical moment, is often termed the Pauline problem. It highlights how historical narratives are constructed, not merely recorded. However, this interpretation isn't universally accepted, and some scholars present a different perspective. These counterarguments for harmonizing Acts and Paul's letters are crucial to acknowledge. Many scholars contend that Acts might be describing a separate, perhaps later Jerusalem meeting, or that Paul, writing to the Galatians with a specific polemical purpose, simply chose to omit details that didn't serve as immediate argument. Others suggest Luke, the author of Acts, had access to different oral traditions or written sources and aimed to present a broader, more inclusive historical narrative. Yet even proponents of harmonization must grapple with Paul's uncompromising assertion in Galatians 2:6, "They added nothing to me." This tension between Paul's personal account and Luke's broader narrative isn't just a matter of historical accuracy. It points to something far more fundamental, a struggle for narrative control that would ultimately shape which texts were deemed authoritative and how they were understood for centuries to come. These textual differences, then, are not mere editorial choices, but rather echoes for the very soul and direction of the early Christian movement. Paul's radical vision, emphasizing grace and universal inclusion without strict adherence to Jewish law, held immense appeal for the Gentile world, ultimately proving more adaptable and expansive than the Jerusalem apostles' more circumscribed approach. Paradoxically, the inclusion of both Paul's letters and the book of Acts within the New Testament canon served to preserve the evidence of this deep conflict, even as it presented a carefully curated, unified front to subsequent generations. This intricate process of canonization, guided by human choice and theological agendas, was instrumental in facilitating what scholars call the Gentile turn of Christianity, permanently shifting its identity. Having meticulously pieced together these individual fragments of evidence, we can now begin to synthesize their collective meaning and truly understand Paul's transformative impact. Bringing these threads together, the textual evidence paints a compelling picture. Paul was far more than a mere missionary. He was a powerful, independent theological innovator whose apostleship, as he claimed, derived directly from Christ, not from the Jerusalem pillars. His confrontations with Peter and James, particularly concerning the necessity of Jewish law for Gentiles, were not minor squabbles but foundational disputes over the very identity and doctrine of the nascent faith. The stark contradictions between his epistles and the book of Acts underscore the dynamic and contested nature of early Christianity, revealing it to be far from the monolithic entity often imagined. This Pauline problem demonstrates a profound struggle for the soul of the movement. But what if this struggle had played out differently? This profound struggle raises an unsettling what if? What if the Jerusalem apostles' vision, a Christianity deeply rooted in Jewish law, emphasizing adherence to the Torah, had ultimately prevailed? Would Christianity have remained a localized Jewish sect rather than evolving into the global Gentile-focused religion we know today? This historical pivot compels us to question whether Paul merely propagated the faith or if he in fact fundamentally reinvented its very essence. To solidify our understanding of this transformative figure, let's now synthesize our findings. Our investigation confirms a pivotal historical truth. Paul's own letters, especially Galatians, reveal an apostle asserting fierce, independent authority, often in direct conflict with Jerusalem's leadership. This contrasts sharply with the book of Acts' harmonized narrative of early Christian unity. Scholarship consistently points to these textual discrepancies as evidence of profound historical tensions and theological debates. Ultimately, Paul's radical reinterpretation of Christianity, emphasizing grace for Gentiles, became the dominant strain, fundamentally reshaping the faith. Yet, even with these insights, the precise motivations and the full scale of this foundational schism remain a tantalizing, unresolved mystery. While our investigation has illuminated profound textual conflicts and strategic assertions of authority, the true extent of the initial schism between Paul and the Jerusalem apostles is debated. We've uncovered the battle for narrative control, but the precise internal dynamics, the unspoken compromises, and the full human cost of this theological divergence are still hotly debated among scholars. How much of the unified narrative we inherited was a carefully constructed piece, built upon selective presentation and strategic redaction of a much messier, more complex past? This enduring mystery forces us to confront the fluid nature of history itself. Now we turn to you. We encourage you to delve into these fascinating primary texts yourself, Paul's epistles and the book of Acts, and compare them. What are your thoughts on Paul's transformative role in shaping Christianity? Did he truly reinvent the faith, or merely expand upon it in ways the original apostles might not have foreseen? Share your perspective on the historical Paul and the profound implications of this textual divergence in the comments below. Your engagement is what makes this deep dive possible, allowing us to continue exploring such complex historical narratives. If you appreciate this rigorous, evidence-based approach and our meticulous exploration of biblical narratives, please consider supporting Biblical Mysteries on Patreon. Your contributions are vital. They allow us to dedicate the time and resources necessary for these deep dives into history and textual analysis, ensuring we can continue to uncover the hidden complexities behind sacred texts. Your support directly fuels this independent research and helps keep this channel going. Thank you to all our incredible patrons for making this possible. And speaking of uncovering more, next time we're delving into another figure shrouded in mystery. What other biblical figures do you believe warrant a deeper, skeptical investigation? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. For instance, join us as we delve into the enigmatic figure of Mary Magdalene and the lost Gospels that redefined her legacy. If this journey into Paul's complex legacy resonated with you, please give this video a like. And subscribe to Biblical Mysteries, hitting that notification bell so you don't miss our next historical excavation. Finally, share this video with anyone curious about the untold stories behind the sacred texts.